Welcome back to my channel. Time to move on to the actual marriages between older men and much younger women. Is there actual love involved, or is it only hypergamy from women wanting financial security, thus sacrificing love or romance, and the man just wanting a young partner for sex without having a personal emotional attachment to her? My personal opinion is, like so many things, it is sometimes love and sometimes not. Perhaps with a higher percentage of not in these cases compared to marriages where the age difference is within something like 6 years. And the bigger the age gap, the more likely love isn't involved. But more likely doesn't mean most. I have no idea what the percentages may be. I do feel it is fine for society as a whole to view these relationships as problematic, but wrong when people assume individuals in such relationships are either scammers or, to use a favorite term, pedophiles. Heck, when I've just defended young women, I've had busybody old lady types accuse me of being a pedophile. Yet the women I was defending ranged in age from 25 to their upper 30s, not exactly qualifying for such a definition. And then there was the fact that nothing I said in defending them had anything to do with me having, seeking, or wanting a relationship with them. Much like labeling someone a simp, beta male, racist, sexist, etc., such attacks are usually just tactics to smear someone when there is no basis to do so. Anyway, let's dig into why it may often be a matter of love, and about economic security, and about sex. It does seem that the large age gaps happen more often in places where the women are often in poverty. If love is as likely in large age gaps as in narrow age gaps, why wouldn't there be just as many large age gap relationships even when there isn't a poverty factor? But I have a theory, even though I acknowledge that there are certainly cases where there is no real love. I think most people would agree that women are more focused on security. At one time, this would involve both the need for a provider and someone to physically protect them. That is, the man who was a good hunter and also someone to fight off any threat. Both still apply today, but I'd say the provider aspect is more critical in most cases. In modern society, especially in the West, it has gotten more complicated. Many more tasks for providing the needs of a family can be done by both men and women, but in a poverty situation, it's just hard on everyone. My theory is that the very things which each sex is predisposed to care the most about also causes people to fall in love. Not every time, of course. After all, a man may see many beautiful women. He doesn't fall in love with all of them. Likewise, for a woman who is attracted to security, there may be many men who could provide it, but she doesn't fall in love with all of them either. In fact, I think it can be a warning sign if a guy somehow only manages to have serious relationships with the absolute most beautiful women. Likewise, if a woman only goes with the wealthiest men they can find. If there is a pattern, I'd have some suspicions. Of course, without knowing the individuals really well, I certainly wouldn't repeat those suspicions in public. But I think that whatever our genetics do that cause people to love another, it is affected by availability. I remember reading a study about men rating single women when there were lots to choose from, like at a big party. And as the night wore on, and the prettiest women had already matched themselves up with a man, the remaining men rated the still available women higher than they did at first. They simply adjusted to the relative scarcity by upgrading the women who were left, which, if you think about it, is actually a good thing. We hear a lot of stuff about how 80% of one sex only goes after the top 20% of the other. That always sounded a bit off to me. After all, throughout history, most people got married. So clearly people were marrying those way below the top 20%. And while some may not actually love their mate, I think most do. At least at first. How long a relationship lasts isn't my topic. This may have become a bigger problem in the West because of women often making their own substantial incomes. Thus, they may figure they can be more picky. But I think it is a fool's errand, as many women, by the time they realize only a small portion of women are going to get the top men, these women are now older and less desirable to men themselves. But how are the natural, main preferences of each sex going to affect love in large age gap relationships? I'm going to focus on poor countries because, while still complicated, it at least narrows down the possibilities. So, we have women in poverty, surrounded by men in poverty, with most of them not leaving their local area, which limits the number of potential mates. If that were all there was, I suspect we'd find that those poor women would still find local men they would actually fall in love with in spite of poverty. And if the women saw a young man from a poor family who seemed to be a harder worker, there'd be a greater chance he'd be the one she'd fall in love with because of the greater potential for future improvement. But what happens when people come in from the outside? In the case of the Philippines, this is probably going to be an older foreigner. In all likelihood, he is going to be in better financial shape than most in a poverty area. The women still want security, so even an older man is going to be an attraction. The question is, would there be love as well? I think so. I think the same biological or genetic drive for security based on who is available still applies. I think if you have lots of young, hardworking guys with strong prospects for good future employment, and also lots of much older men who have accumulated wealth and are retired, most of those women will fall for the younger guy. After all, the younger guy will also be around longer to provide protection and security. While it may be of secondary importance for women, they will still usually prefer a good-looking young man, other things being equal, that they can grow old with. But that often isn't the situation in a place like the Philippines. Not that much opportunity for the young men, even if they have the drive. And odds are, for those who are in a good situation, they probably are mostly looking for the women who are not in poverty situations. Then you have to add in the weird bias against the darker, morena-skinned women. So what are these women who logically want security to do? Well, they deal with the reality they have by falling in love with the best of who is available. This is a good thing, considering the alternatives of not loving someone they marry or living alone or worse. Just as men, when the best-looking women are gone, suddenly decide those that are left are prettier than they originally thought. Are there potential problems? Of course. You have not only age differences, but racial and cultural differences, all of which can make a long-term relationship struggle. Her friends will also be quite young, so even if your wife adjusts well to your relationship, how are you going to fit in when multiple families get together and all the other couples are much younger than you? What do you have in common when everyone else is talking about things you have no interest in? It can be like, especially in decades past, when you had mixed racial marriages, you and your spouse may handle it well. But, for example, being the only white person at a gathering or the only black person can create a lot of difficulties depending on the others present. Anyway, two people fall in love with a big age gap in the Philippines can be just fine. But there are still potential problems they should think about. What if you bring her back to the West? Lots of good-looking, successful young men who will be flirting with your wife, especially if she has her own job, since she'll meet more men in that situation. Does she fall for one of them? Or is she just overwhelmed with all the attention she gets in the West when she was considered below average in her own country by her own fellow Filipinos? Temptation abounds, but it doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Men, if put in a situation with lots of attractive women after them, have the same temptations. Heck, it isn't unusual for a happily married man to look at a very pretty young woman passing by, yet a minute later he forgets all about her and still loves his wife. Another problem, if you bring the Filipino back to the West, is that some Westerners, especially women, will be telling your wife that she can do better. Lots of challenges, but yes, I think the older man can truly love the younger woman, and the woman can love the man. Certainly, neither should have a goal of taking advantage of the other, but that happens too. What I think is the biggest concern, even when they both love each other, is how the woman's attitude may change when her much older partner is no longer just a senior citizen, but a very old and decrepit senior citizen, especially since it is something you really can't predict with confidence. Thanks for watching, and don't let the trolls stop you from speaking out.